very briefly each presentation, and then I'm going to give my chair to each presenter. The first one is called Special Humanities, Moving Beyond the Dot on a Map, which mainly deals with a certain rearrangement with space, from the meanings to the representability of space. This will be presented by Laura Carletti from University of Nottingham. The second one is called is titled Specially Organized Virtual Narratives of Contested Urban Space, Digital Methods of Mapping the Spatial Experience of Shared Heritage. And this will present the development of hybrid digital environments that stage urban narratives to study the role of monuments of cultural heritage on the development of historic sites, mainly focusing on the Green Light of Nicosia in Cyprus. The presenter of this paper will be Georgios Artopoulos, here. The third paper is titled Playing with Perception, Locative Narrative and Sonic Virtual Locations, and will examine the Lost Index, which is a series of apps created by the authors to explore experiences of virtual spaces in real-world settings. This will be presented by Emma Whittaker, here. And the last paper we have is called After the Death of Cyber Flaneur, which deals with what happens to the cyber flaneur of the contemporary mediated milieus by digital technologies and social media, presented by Efthymia Kassimati, here. And may I now give way to Laura.
I am Laura Carletti. I'm from the University of Nottingham, and today I'm presenting preliminary findings of a pilot project that was implemented last year, between 2013 and this year. Okay. So the origin of the project. Last year, about July, it was the beginning of July, we participated, a group of researchers participated in a sandpit in Castle Donington. I don't know if you know where it is. It's in the East Midlands. It's almost in the middle of nowhere. And they took us for 2 days in this beautiful hotel. It's called the Priest House Hotel, and actually you can't do anything else than working there, because even they don't want you to go for walks by yourself, because I don't know what happened in the surroundings, but then anyway, it's the perfect place to keep interdisciplinary researchers together for a couple of days and work together. And what happened there is that small working groups were formed, working groups of interdisciplinary researchers from computer science, humanities, and arts, to reason and to apply for a small grant. And what happened in my group was that it was this list of people, Robert Allen from the Digital Innovation Lab at the University of North Carolina, and Nick Barron, who is an historian from the University of Nottingham, myself, and I am a fellow at the Horizon Digital Economy Research, and I deal with digital learning and engagement through technology. And Tim Colan, a colleague of mine, who is in human-computer interaction, and Catherine Davis, who does Latin American studies, and Bronak Ferran, who is at the Royal College of Art doing performance studies and so on. So we started to reason together what we could propose, and we started to kind of talk about common interests, and really randomly, it emerged that most of us, we were working around the concept of space, around the representation of space, around putting our data on maps. And so it was quite natural, the further development of our proposal, which was lately received a small grant, because from my point of view, I've been working with Tim. We have been working for the past 2 years on a project called Art Maps with the Tate, in which Horizon developed an application to put the data collection on a map, at the same time asking the public to suggest location for the artworks, for the location represented in the artworks and so on. Catherine Davis, she has been working on a project called Women and Independence in Latin America. Again, she created a data set of events in people life and then later put those through an AHRC funding again on a map. So we realized that there was a lot in common from this point of view, and we prepared a short project proposal during this 2-day, which was granted a small amount of money, and then we implemented it. And the initial discussion was around this spatial turn, which I don't know if you've heard about it. Is this? It started, let's say, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, this increasing interest from the social sciences and arts and humanities towards space. And actually, it increased a lot also after the GIS was made public, and so in the past 10, 15 years with online mapping tools like Google Street Map or Google Map or OpenStreetMap and so on. And the other starting point of our project was this, the observation that there were a lot of standalone projects around mapping cultural content. For standalone project, we mean that a lot of institutions, museums, galleries, as well as university experimented unique project, but the findings wouldn't be kind of the platform, the tools developed couldn't be used by other institutions. So we were like, why cannot we develop open source tools? So we can use open source platform to deliver something which can be reused by other people for different kind of projects. And it also matches, as I say, with the research that we are doing in Horizon, mainly with this project RMaps, as well as at the Digital Innovation Lab. They are developing a WordPress-based open source platform called DRHA, which is very similar in terms of kind of connecting cultural content, cultural information, and space. So our research question was, how can we use technology to represent, understand interrelation among place, events, and people, and what are also the requirements common to a range of digital humanities, special humanities projects, which can be represented and which can be kind of driven towards the use of the same tool, of the same platform. And the aim was actually really to explore what was out there and try to conceptualize the direction to go after. So it was really a pilot project, a small project of 6 months. And the method that we used was an environmental scan study, a case study, and 2 focus groups with digital humanities stakeholders. For environmental scan study, we mean that we analyzed several special humanities projects, existing online web-based projects. We analyzed about 20 of them, and then we implemented 2 case studies, one with data set from the British Library, and another one with the data set from the Women and Independence in Latin America. And then we realized 2 focus groups in Nottingham with different researchers, geographers, arts and humanists, and computer scientists, human-computer interaction designer, and so on. And what happened is that, can you tell me the time then, because I don't know.
You still have 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, so plenty of time. So what were the findings, all these methods and these events that we organized, the survey that we did? Basically, we realized that a lot of projects are technology driven. That means that a lot of them are still dot on a map. So if you see many projects in spatial humanities, web-based projects, you will see that often space is just represented as a dot on a map. And this happens also with art maps, for instance, the project I'm being involved in, because it's based on the use of current technologies, current mapping technologies, and GIS basically wasn't developed for cultural content and for humanities research data, but was mainly developed for environment. So it's really connected to the physical space. So the mapping is an abstraction of the physical space, whereas in the humanities, the notions and the research data are more ambiguous, are subject to interpretation. So to kind of deliver that content into a map is always a kind of clash. It's the current mapping systems, online mapping system, are really simplification. So, for instance, when we talk about technologies versus space, most of the technology developed are still dot on the map. And when we see something more not interesting, but something more complex is we see when we analyze standalone projects, which were developed really in connection with the original data sets. So the other problem is the humanities versus space. So if technology versus space is still a dot on a map, research data from arts and humanities versus space is more interpretations, relationships, ambiguity, uncertainty. So now the current technology is only able to represent simply dot on a map and sometimes relationship when they are further developed. But the mapping software provide a kind of primitive, basic approach to the complexity of the humanities. And on the other side, from the computer science point of view, taking the richness and the wideness of the arts and humanities research data into technology is often an issue, because arts and humanities scholars, they tend to take written notes. They don't develop their data in a computational way. So even their data are difficult to be imported, to be represented on current technology. So during the two focus groups especially, the first one, there was just an open discussion. And it was clear kind of frustration from the arts and humanities scholars towards the technology, towards the dot on a map, how it's the simplification and to the desire to go beyond that, but on the same time, not the lack of skills to develop the technology further. On the other side, from the computer scientists, is like, okay, we don't know, they have no knowledge of the ambiguity and uncertainty interpretation of the data. They tend to develop and to use current technology. So what we came out with was that it's difficult now to make current technology talk with current practices of arts and humanities scholars. What I mean again is that current technology doesn't offer more than a dot on a map. On the other side, the data in the art and humanities are often not computational. So there is a need in terms of, on one side, a discussion about does the art and humanities scholar have to fit their data, have to force their data and their research into the current technology, or we can develop the technology, take the mapping technology further by trying to do research and including their practices and the ambiguity of the humanities into the limitation of technology. So the final findings were really that the current technology cannot speak with the current practices. So there's a need of evolution, but in both sides, from the arts and humanities side in terms of practices, but from the technology in terms of developing something further, something that was originated initially for the environment and for the physical representation of space. So we applied, so there is no answer now, that is the current situation now in this field, and we really realized that to take the technology further to meet the needs of the arts and humanities scholar, there is a further need of interdisciplinary research. And so we applied, the original group of the project, we applied for further funding, and so we got this funding, and we are now about to start this project, which is just about a community of practice between scholars from the arts and humanities side at the University of Nottingham and scholars from the technology side. And the idea is to start a kind of structured discussion around this theme, and then to apply for further fundings to actually do proper research into the further development of mapping technologies. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I think it's very meaningful, because this is an art installation by Aram Bartol. He's a German artist, and he's actually created this installation based on the Google pin, on the red marker, and this artwork kind of questions the idea of the space, of the kind of common visual culture that Google Map created, and the kind of accuracy that we think Google has in terms of defining the space, but then the clash that we had, what is the center of the city in Google, what is the social center of the city. When you approach this technology with a different mind, with an art and humanities mind, you realize how limited it is. And so that's actually our future direction, is to understand how we can actually represent the ambiguity and the wideness of art and humanities research data on future maps, which currently don't exist. Thank you.
Today I will talk about the research my colleagues Nicolas Bakirtzis, Sorin Hermond and I are currently developing in the context of the Cyprus Institute's collaborations with the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the Cyprus Department of Antiquities, and the Nicosia Master Plan Group of the Municipality of Nicosia. The digital methods we've been working on focus on knowledge sharing and communicating experience. They are based on multi-methodology approaches and interdisciplinary collaborations between heritage, architecture, archaeology, urban studies, and simulated environments. Our research suggests a new experience-centered method of site explorations that facilitates data collection of misappropriated territories and challenged historic sites. Today, it is expected that the raft transregional movement from the countryside to urban centers we are witnessing will further fragment large metropolitan areas with contemporary or historic territorial, social, or cultural divisions, thus resulting to further gentrification and decomposition of their territorial cohesion. In this context, historic cities at the crossroads of cultural activity or at national borders like Jerusalem, Mersta, Berlin, Belfast, and Nicosia, which operate as interface areas, demonstrate important transformations of their public space. This dynamic character of these territories offers a particularly intriguing framework that to map and analyze the relation between cultural identities, collective memories, and spatial experience. Although this relation has been addressed extensively in scholarship in the past, advanced technologies offer vast new possibilities for interdisciplinary research. Monuments of cultural heritage can be a catalyst in redefining the spatial experience of historic cities for citizens and outsiders alike. In the case of the walled Nicosia, which is our project's primary case study, it is a reality that the city is not only divided but also fragmented in its preservation and development over the last 40 years. Different from studies that focus on the politics of division, this research starts with the impact this enforced separation of the urban terrain has had on the experience and understanding of the city. Common resources, shared space in multicultural environments, and public space are considered as some of the most dynamic constituting parts of the archipelago of spaces in contemporary cities. In these complex urban realities, monuments can play the role of cultural lighthouses, that is, condensers that punctuate flows of movement and trigger social interaction and engagement with history. Chapters in the long layered history of these monuments can be used as stages of the ever-transforming urban terrain that unhide critical moments in the palimpsest of the city's history. In the case of the Cypriot capital Nicosia, whose historic core remains enclosed behind the iconic 16th century Venetian fortifications, the historical transformations of the structure of the Paphos Gate have had great impact on the complex experience of urban space. As part of the city's medieval fortifications, which for centuries defined the experience of Nicosia's urban space, the Paphos Gate was one of the city's thresholds, separating inside from outside, urban from rural, safe from hostile, and so on. Since 1974 and the physical separation of Nicosia, the Paphos Gate has become an iconic symbol of division, as it is virtually located in the infamous green line that divides the city. The virtual restaging of the spatial experience of the different historical phases of selected parts of Nicosia's public spaces, due to their association with important monuments, can help us to unlock their condensed meaning in collective memory, and thus utilize this knowledge to mend Nicosia's threatened cultural cohesion. The Paphos Gate is the first case of such a space that is currently mapped as a proof of concept of our methodology. Our research focuses not on the border, but on the relationship that citizens and users establish with it. The topography of a border can be ephemeral, whereas its topology can be permanent. Then one should study how users understand their physical body location in relation to the border, and what does the border mean to them. Historical actions like accumulative building of auxiliary structures, change of use, transformation enforced by political, social, or religious reasons, rehabilitation, or partial demolition of cultural monuments and parts of a historic city, produce a different, unplanned image of space. These transformations of the built environment provoke changes in the perception of social and cultural identity. Distinct from the socio-political discussion of the destruction of landmarks and monuments for retaliation and the erasure of the other's presence from a place, this research focuses on the recognition of heritage by the inhabitants of the place through their everyday use of the public space. In this context, choosing or learning to ignore particular sites is a political act that forms a selective understanding of shared histories. The case of Nicosia offers an instructive example of this selective process. Following the 1960s hostilities between the Greek and Turkish Cypriots and the consolidation of the physical division of the city after 1974, churches, monasteries, mosques, Ottoman public fountains were abandoned, while streets and neighborhoods changed names in an effort to rewrite the city's history and topography. Responding to this problem by communal initiatives like the Nicosia Master Plan Group or trust-building efforts sponsored by the international community, invested in the restoration and preservation of shared heritage. However, most restored buildings remain in an awkward historical limbo, being sporadically used for cultural events, but having in effect lost their role and position in Nicosia's traumatized civic identity. Studying how and what users of Nicosia choose to neglect will enable our research methodology to develop and test spatial strategies that contribute to the reassociation of these historic sites with the everyday lives of its users. This reconstruction of the various phases the Paphos Gate went through will be spatially contextualized with the digitization of the moat and the Venetian fortifications of the city, after a request by the municipality of Nicosia, which constitute the first stage of our project. In particular, the Cyprus Department of Antiquities has recently invited us to submit design proposals for architectural interventions on the archaeological site in and around the Paphos Gate, which is a public space and it's part of the moat of the city. This case demonstrates how the presented research can contribute to the reassociation of these cultural monuments with the existing of the rest of the existing urban space of the city, as the moat is currently an empty open-air zone around both parts of the divided capital, and thus could be used creatively for the development of a new contemporary identity for the city. The digital techniques used to stage these simulated environments enable us to understand how the position, scale, organization, form, proportions of openings, and other experiential aspects of the simulated space impact the bodily movement of users with regards to their walking pace, direction, points of stasis, points of interest, gaze, etc. In the second step of the first phase of the research, the user base of the simulated environment will be extended to include also non-expert users. And in the second phase of the research, the interactive environment will not only host reconstructions of historic buildings, but will also present future interventions that are at the stage of procurement or under public discussion. It is expected that this phase will provide insights for the degree of integration that the planned works may have with the rest of the existing urban space, as well as information regarding their acceptance by the locals. The presented methodology facilitates the emergence of a new narrative flow between the new, that is, projected interventions in the urban scape, the old, and the absent, that is, unbuilt, demolished, or transformed buildings and monuments. This coexistence of parallel dimensions of alternative realities, for example, a construction complete as it is used to be or as it is planned to become, allows professionals to experiment, test, and explore hidden conditions of the built environment, and also invites users to learn from past stories, imagine their place in the new conditions presented for the city, and immerse themselves in staged places. The purpose of this journey is twofold. While users educate themselves about the history of a monument, operators of the simulated environment are able to collect data of the visitor's spatial behavior. The incorporation of the stereoscopic vision of Oculus Rift goggles and Virtuix Omni walking device we've been working with allow us the collection of metadata of bodily movement in the virtual space that is more descriptive of the user's spatial behavior than data collected through typical input devices in digital worlds like mouse, keyboard, joystick, space pilot, hand gestures, etc. So I would like now to conclude with some considerations regarding the contribution and further development of the research presented. Producing metadata of simulated visits by users of different age, education, cultural background, or ethnic origin can offer a broader spectrum of responses which can further our understanding of the qualitative variances of their city walking experience. Distinct from practices that work at a bird's-eye view of urban dynamics, the methodology presented focuses on the micro scale of the moving body on the performative stage of the public realm. Our colleagues at NCSA are currently developing proprietary software tools to analyze movement data from the users and map it on the terrain of Nicosia, while future installments include multi-user interaction via avatars and role-playing narratives, and the integration of users' movement data with agent-based simulations. This technique aims to test the use of real people movement data as beacons for the simulated crowd behavior. In the physical space of a city, when its users explore the built environment, places are actualized like nodes in a network, a territory that emerges out of the synthesis of its users' paths. And I'm referring here to Foucault's concept of heterotopias and their formation. So how could this condition be framed in the digital space? In our research, what does this virtual city space stand for when compared to the existing conditions of the physical city? Well, first, this simulated space offers a neutral virtual canvas upon which researchers can engage urban planners and policymakers for experimentation and remote collaboration. Second, typical methods of urban studies often lack the kinesthetic and situated identity that characterize the historical performance of the studied places, and therefore omit the embodied knowledge that could lead to new, informed understanding of the cultural context of a cityscape. Third, this simulated environment enabled the exploration of archaeological hypotheses, of unrealized conditions, for example, planned but never materialized transformations of the urban environment or a building, and unresolved situations for revisiting historical narratives. Also, it can offer in-depth exploration of important characteristics and parameters of the studied site or artifact that would otherwise remain hidden. Some examples of techniques used and media taxonomies we are using to support this exploration include digital simulations, reflectance transformation imaging, high-fidelity animations of construction details, of construction processes, and the history of materials used, the evolution of the monument's design, etc. And lastly, it could function as a didactic platform addressed to the public that would make complex, otherwise unattainable knowledge accessible by opening up the educational process to communities of the city that may be excluded. So, mapping the simulated spatial experience of historically layered spaces can provide a model methodology for interdisciplinary approaches to the synthesis of a flexible policy framework that will bring the following benefits: a better basis for cities' informed rehabilitation and preservation of cultural heritage, an improved capacity to identify potential conflict hotspots in the studied cases, and interdisciplinary discursive formations of transmitting cultural heritage and shared values in multicultural societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgios. And now I am officially introducing properly James Brocklehurst and Emma Whittaker, who will present Playing with Perception, Locative Narrative and Sonic Virtual Locations.
We inhabit here and elsewhere. Our real world can be present to us, but so can our plans for next week. While we imagine our forthcoming trip, arriving at the station, perhaps picturing a probable platform, we have walked to work, crossed busy roads, and have a vague recollection of waving to someone across the street. Reading may prompt focused imagining. The travel brochure tells us of local restaurants and a nearby metro station. Later you put on the radio. It's 2019. You're standing in the gallery. The phone rings. The door bangs. Approaches to the development of virtual spaces range from fully rendered, dynamically responsive simulations to places that exist in the imagination. While qualities of naturalism and liveliness may perceptually and intuitively differ, both hold the potential for a sense of presence, of being there. Locative narrative can be defined as narrative audio experiences that are heard on headphones and take place in real-world locations. The world of the story is evoked through recorded sound and narrative in relation to the environment, as explored by many contemporary artists such as Blast Theory, Duncan Speakman, Misha Myers, Janet Cardiff, etc. A sonic virtual location, as it is presented here, is the evocation of a physical place created with ambient and recorded sounds in the context of the listening environment. It is virtual in the sense that the recorded sounds do not terminate in physical sources, a door making contact with its frame. Although writing over 100 years ago, William James's radical empiricist approach to being and perception offers tools for thinking about interactive technologies and the phenomenal experience of virtual spaces. Seeking explanations for how individuals feel, think, perceive and behave in the environment, his writing prefigures, to some extent, embodied approaches to perception. James's philosophy was firmly rooted in physiological empirical research, with the qualification that anything experienced should be considered as real. Drawing on the writings of William James, this paper considers what it is like to experience imaginary worlds evoked by locative narrative in the context of design and development of the Lost Index collection of smartphone apps. William James says that most concepts are not validated by a terminus. We live on trust. To continue thinking unchallenged is 99 times out of 100 our practical substitute for knowing in the completed sense. Mind and matter not as dualities, but what James calls the stuff of pure experience, tracing paths, relations in degrees of intimacy, as memories, desires, aims, time, space, distance, activity change. Subjectivity and objectivity are not affairs of what an experience is aboriginally made of, but of its classification. Classifications depend on our temporary purposes. When do we attribute the status of the real, mediated or imagined, to the contents of our thoughts? What are the relations between the percipient, the object and the environment, and how do they function? Affect is ambiguous in terms of its classifications, James tells us. I feel the warm air, or I feel that the air is warm. We give objects and our feelings attributes. Feelings ascribed to objects do not determine how physical objects will act, but they can produce immediate bodily effects, such as increased heartbeat, quickening breath, sweating, salivating, etc. The ambiguity of classification demonstrates how it is difficult to designate objects through introspection as mental or material. The sound of the door banging is present to us. Alva Noé argues that presence is achieved. He says that we see both more and less. The sensory information that enters our eyes, We perceive the three-dimensional shape as round, even though we only see the front surface. We fail to see things in front of our eyes when our attention is focused elsewhere. Concepts are also a mode of access to the world. The idea of a fish allows us to identify it as such. Presence, Noé argues, is the degree of access to the world that thought, perception and engagement make possible. Sound. Binaural sounds heard on headphones can create the sense that sources of sounds are located in the environment surrounding the listener rather than between the ears. The perception of auditory cues, however, can be affected by their congruency with the listening environment. Consumer headphones allow ambient sounds to bleed into the recorded audio, supplementing, masking or multiplying auditory cues, with the potential for ambiguity, misattribution of sound sources and cross-modal illusions. Brian Masumi argues that senses are lived in, that perception is amodal and of our situated relations in the environment, a multisensory unfolding of body and world. Narrative suggestion. You receive a phone call. Friends you are meeting for lunch have arrived and are making their way upstairs to the gallery. You anticipate their arrival. You are not surprised to hear the muffled sound of voices, the door, footsteps. You turn around. Suggestion can prime the listener for perceiving. As Roy Ascott points out, our world is always mediated by language. The real was only virtual, after all. The effects of suggestion have long been known. In the 19th century, it was associated with Franz Mesmer and with stage hypnotism. In 1890, William James observed that hypnotism involved focused attention coupled with the disassociation of background ideas. Writing about recent neuroscience research, David Spiegel describes hypnosis as a state of highly focused attention coupled with reduced peripheral awareness, and has been shown to affect attention, alter visual, auditory and pain perception in some but not all participants. The language used in hypnotic inductions is often sparse, inviting participants to fill in the gaps with their own particular experience. Imagine that you're holding something heavy in your hand. Whatever you see is all right. Suggestion can become an evocative, imaginative stimulus for perceiving. As public spaces, museums are often densely layered with artifacts and interpretation materials. However, rather than competing for space, audio experiences heard on headphones can unobtrusively layer alternative worlds that can perceptually and imaginatively transform the existing place. Building on locative research in outdoor environments, the Lost Index collection of smartphone apps was used as case studies to explore what it is like to experience virtual spaces inside museums. Prototypes were developed through an iterative process of testing. Small groups of up to 25 participants contributed accounts of experience in questionnaires and individual semi-structured interviews. These accounts are not considered as statistically viable data, but as memories, reflections upon experience, told from a current vantage point, as partial, particular, and fallible. These pumps for reflection resulted in subsequent iterations and 3 approaches to development: simulation, illusion, and suggestion. The Lost Index apps. The Lost Index apps take a science fiction narrative premise that the museum has a covert role in maintaining stability in the universe. However, this position has been compromised, resulting in environmental volatility and the public's belief in the legitimacy of institutions. A battle is ensuing between the security forces and malevolent enemy agents. Lost Index number 1, Landscape with Figures, combines a guided imaginary experience with binaural and ambient sound. You receive a phone call from the security forces. They ask you to don headphones. You are directed to the first floor of a museum where you're informed that some time ago you were a volunteer in an experiment to become a human hard drive. Information was stored in your mind. While you have no recollection of this event, the material now needs to be retrieved. The speaker directs you to a landscape painting where a guided imaginary experience begins, taking you into the world of the painting to recover this data. While in no way hypnotizing participants, the app combines attention-focusing techniques with narrative devices to enhance engagement with the story and potentially affect the perception of the recorded sounds which are playing at the same time.
The Lost Index number 2, the Turning app, continues the premises of the first and asks participants to navigate through the museum space, collecting numbers from exhibits in order to restore order to the fabric of reality. In this app, sonic virtual environments are created in 3 ways: by enhancing the ambient sounds particular to each gallery, by layering spatial dimensions of the museum store, by using narrative to influence how the space is perceived, and employing a game mechanism to help situate the participants as protagonists. It was important that the participant experienced a seamless transition between the layered ambient sounds as they moved from room to room, that they weren't interpreting this change as being artificially enacted by the app itself. This was enabled through the use of Bluetooth low-energy eye beacons. These are small battery-powered devices that transmit a signal that the participant's phone can detect, enabling the app to locate itself within the space. Eye beacons are suited for use in museums and galleries because they're cost-effective, easy to install, and unobtrusive. They're essentially little kind of tiny little objects that you can place in cases, and the phone can work out where it is within that space. Visual information on the device screen was designed to support the primary oral experience rather than distract the player from these elements. And this is achieved through 3 methods. Firstly, the participant's phone is transformed into a fictional device, a volatility meter, situated within the narrative as a means for locating the missing objects. Styling of this device was linked thematically to the genre of the narrative, drawing inspiration from science fiction user interfaces and radar display screens. The second method was to synchronize visual and oral narrative events. Throughout the game, the player is interrupted in their task by phone calls from an unidentified narrator. When this occurs, the physical phone becomes a phone within the story, and this is indicated with both visual and auditory cues. The third method is that information required to play the game was also communicated via the screen. Data is presented on the screen to identify aspects such as the current room that the player is in, an object that is in range, and items that have been collected. These are displayed in an unobtrusive way, enabling the player to just glance at them when needed without a demand for continual attention, therefore giving precedence to the oral spatial experience. The index of the title is presented as such, the slide on the the right there, a list of items that the player gradually obtains in support of the story premise. Okay. I'm now going to play a video which gives you a sense of how the app operates and the experience of using it within the museum. And hopefully we've got sound. Okay. So this is what the player would see on the screen, and the sounds that we're hearing are generated by the app using binaural spatial sound. So this is overlaid over the sounds that someone's actually hearing within the space itself. And as you move between the different areas, the ambient sound changes in response to that location. Here the participant has found an object that's she's trying to index and inputs a code that might be displayed nearby, therefore allowing the app to sort of identify that that object has been found. So it becomes a bit like a treasure hunt. Here the screen shows the index as it's being gradually collected. And there's a time limit to the game as well, so you have a clock ticking down, and as the time reaches 0, the sounds of reality breaking down become more intense, and the spatial sounds within the room reduce. So here the unfortunate player has run out of time, and they failed in that particular attempt. Okay. One quick swap around.
Are there any particular qualities that differentiate the real from the imagined? Merleau-Ponty puts that we don't just have states of consciousness, or we'd not be able to distinguish between dreams and reality, of which we have no trouble with. We can differentiate precisely because one is continuous and the other is not. Otherwise, there will be two indistinguishable current states of being. He says it is the experience of truth that is self-evident. However focused our attention, however protracted and vivid the alternative environment is set against a world that persists. Arguably, the real has a quality of tangible liveliness to it that sets it a quiver from the shadowy imagined. Cars can function in the real world in ways that our imaginary cars can only seem to function in alternative worlds. Perhaps if simulators could perform in our immediate experience in ways that mimicked everything of real life, their verisimilitude would be enough to secure their indivisibility from the real. Our perception of the real is dependent upon context and classification, memory, habitual associations, and is subject to the focus of attention, suggestion, and upon our transitory lived experience in which we move between concepts and percepts. If our sense of being present here is textured with moments of outward focused attention, reflection, daydream, speculation, and propositional imagining, why should our sense of presence in mediated environments be any less textured than our everyday encounters with the world that consist of a shifting foci of perceptions and ideas? Need presence operate as a binary opposition. The co-experience of narrative, interaction, movement, and sound, alongside techniques of simulation, illusion, and suggestion, unsettle the certainty of their classification as real, mediated, or imagined. However, participants' stance towards the experience and a willingness to engage in pretense or make-believe contributes to the phenomenal experiences of virtual spaces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As Elena mentioned before, I will try to discuss the connection between the flaneur, Baudelaire's symbol of modernity, and his more recent electronic incarnation known as cyberflaneur. First, I will shortly introduce the notion of flâneurie as a basic methodological tool for reading and experiencing the city, moving on to investigate what happened to its digital avatar. Then, by transposing and implementing the dialectic of flâneurie in the current technopolitical context of digital gadgets and portable computing devices, I will conclude my discussion with addressing new strategies for reconsidering its role, the role of flâneurie towards a reappropriation of the present hybrid urban territory. So, everyone loves the flaneur, this gentleman stroller of city streets, as the French poet Charles Baudelaire put it. Especially in the field of architecture, where my background is, flaneur is actually a constantly recurring motif, having a key role in understanding and portraying the city. But let's begin from its definition, borrowed again from Baudelaire, who is said to have invented the term of the verb flâner, which means to stroll in French. Quite important is the double role that Flaneur played in city life. He constructs a specific narrative of the place while remaining a detached observer. Both one with and set apart from the crowds he inhabits, his art, known as flânerie, was the observing incognito and feast with his eyes on the sights of the modern city. This poetic figure of the 19th century Paris was further translated into an emblematic archetype of modernity through the work of Walter Benjamin, the great chronicler of Baudelaire and Flaneur in general. In his work, he depicts the flaneur as an artifact, a product of the architectural transformation, the creation of the arcade at the beginning of the capitalism in Paris, which he regards with leisure, resisting the consumption temptation. In this context, the oft-quoted predilection of the flaneur to take a turtle for a walk could be regarded as a protest against both the increased pace of life and the rationalism of Taylorist clock time. As Benjamin informs us, around 1840 it was briefly fashionable to take turtles for a walk in the arcades. The flaneurs liked to have the turtles set the pace for them. So we see that flaneur is historically tied to a specific time and place, the 19th century Paris. However, the practice of flânerie has been allowed as a metaphor to move off the Parisian streets and arcades. The emergence of cyberflaneur as a digital incarnation of the marginal one appeared in the mid-90s as a proper parallel between the city streets and the information superhighway. The idea of exploring cyberspace as a virgin territory, something akin to Bohe's library perhaps, not yet colonized by governments or corporations, seemed like a quite appropriate connection to make. Just remember the names of the early browsers, Internet Explorer, Netscape Navigator, or Web Crawler. They certainly reflected this romantic aspect. Online communities as well, like Tripod or GeoCities, before of course being purchased and shuttered by Yahoo, consisted the true digital arcades of that period, without any sort of hierarchy or classification, by popularity or commercial value. And now what? Can we still talk about flânerie, cyber or otherwise, in the context of Web 2.0, the explosion of social media networks, let alone the emergent app paradigm? What happened to the cyber flaneur? Engaging the history of flânerie and especially the causes of its demise back in the 19th century can actually give us some answers. Among others, what made flânerie possible at first place was actually the city infrastructure. The arcades, these public and semi-public spaces, along with the historic, narrow, dark and mysterious streets, where the flaneur could stroll incognito, enjoying his anonymity and serendipity. However, in the second half of the 20th century, Paris experienced rapid and profound changes. It's not hard to see how the so-called Second Empire reforms, or else the strategic embellishment conducted by Baron Haussmann with the demolition of the small medieval streets and the establishment of the wide, open and transparent boulevards that serve as a model for the today's cityscape, altered Parisian life and the way the residents navigated the city. Such changes had, of course, strong social impacts. This growing rationalism was accompanied by general increase in the pace of life. As a result, the once pleasurable and anonymous ambiguity of the stroll was replaced by the purposeful walk within the rationalization of city life. So, now we have an insight into the conditions of the demise of the original flaneur. We can argue that much the same happened to its digital avatar, who is threatened this time by the structural changes of Internet's architecture. Just like Benjamin asked, in what way, if everything becomes accounted for, could there still be mysteries for the city? We can't help but wonder, in the context of today's Internet landscape, can we really talk about anonymity, mystery and serendipity? How can we define the ability to wonder when the Internet is no longer a place to stand and stare? Over the past few years, one of the most important shifts in the digital world has been the move from the wide open web to semi-closed platforms that use the Internet for transport but not the browser for display. It's driven primarily by the rise of mobile computing, which actually pulls us back from the web. There is an interesting article by Chris Anderson in Wired magazine which portrays best our current network situation. You wake up and check your email on your bedside iPad. That's one app. During breakfast, you browse Facebook, Twitter, and the New York Times. 3 more apps. On the way to the office, you listen to a podcast on your smartphone, another app. At work, you scroll through RSS feeds in a reader and have Skype and Time conversations. More apps. At the end of the day, you come home, make dinner while listening to Pandora, play some games on Xbox Live, and watch a movie on Netflix's streaming service. Well, you've spent the day on the internet, but not on the web. So, the emerging app paradigm, where the issue is less about searching, but more about getting, along with the rising breed of further exciting internet services like Spotify or Netflix, let alone the internet big four, as Eric Schmidt defined Amazon, Apple, Google, and what else, Facebook, have created a digital world far from the early promise of free, anonymous, aimless virtual strolling. The digital network, everything from cell phones to social networking sites, arises as a template for organizing sociality, shaping the modes of participation and citizenship in our societies. Let me illustrate that. Phenomena such as the occupied squares of Cairo, Madrid, US and Athens, or the recent Gezi Park protests in Istanbul, demonstrate how these developments offer new platforms and modes of social engagement and political action. We can see, for instance, how Twitter has become an important communication tool for political protests. Although a detailed account of the geopolitical implications that are noted throughout this problematic is beyond the scope of this presentation, such examples point out how the digital has become immanent to our everyday lives, not only by affecting our habitus, recalling Bourdieu's words, the way we think, the way we act and work, but also reshape how we form communities and cultures, forge social structures, utilize resources, and engage in politics. What I'm trying to say here is that since computers are no longer relegated to a box on the top of our desk, but in our pockets, debates around cyberflanery, typically associated with virtual domains of what might be called the traditional internet, seem quite outdated. To put it differently, harking back to an utopic era of internet history simply fails to address the current situation, which extends to both physical and virtual domains. In any concern around the flaneur, cyber or otherwise, hybrid space needs to be considered. Here I will remind us the words of Henri Lefebvre, quote, "Yes, perhaps in these processes of material and immaterial creations, a new kind of city is produced. It is a kind of city which is not already existing, and it is simply transformed. It is a kind of city which is not yet, but already in existence." End quote. It is a kind of œuvre, in Henri Lefebvre's words, or it is a kind of work of art, if you want. So, focusing on the dialectic of flanery, I believe that certain aspects of this practice could become important keys towards a reappropriation of the present hybrid urban territory. Although the status is often accused for non-existence or dissolution, and perhaps it is difficult to see how a hybrid version of the traditional flanery, working within existing models such as tagging or check-ins, could resist the network hegemony, I believe that there are certain aspects of this perceptive attitude that we should seek to cultivate. We hopefully won't list a turtle, but we can remember that in the end flanery is linked to a potential for cultural innovation. At this point, I will conclude my presentation with a cluster of workshops that took place last year in Athens, under the ambiguous title Datenspiel. The reason I chose it, beside the fact that I personally participated, is because I think it points the way to models for reimagining an identity beyond the templates of this panopticon, and articulates new modes of participation. Referring to the condition of contemporary hybrid cities, where residents' practices, interactions, and encounters occur simultaneously in both physical and digital space, Datenspiels aim to discuss their challenges and contradictions. I will begin with the name of the cluster, which I found really intriguing, since it has a double meaning, just like the word Spiel does in German. It comes to express on one hand the infinite game of data among companies, governments, and citizens, and on the other the possibilities for its unpredictable yet radical reversal. So Datenspiel is a project by Goethe Institute Athens, curated by Daphne Dragona, in collaboration with Frauen Creative Platform and artists from different backgrounds. It is basically a cluster of 4 workshops for the city of Athens, inviting the participants to examine networks, data, and their invisible flows in the urban environment. Using free open source software and low-cost materials, the participants, in collaboration with the artists, develop and test several prototypes and applications trying to detect, capture and map the data of the city of Athens. I will shortly present you the 4 workshops. The first one, called Covered Computing, tutored by Julia and Oliver, explores methods and materials for building and powering hidden networks and communication infrastructure. Tiny, inexpensive computers are hidden inside everyday objects, like a fire alarm detector. Or what appears to be a flower pot could in fact be sharing files or serve web pages. In this way, we can see how such everyday harmless objects are turned actually into powerful devices that can capture and record data. The second workshop, Netless, is described basically by a model for a grassroots communication network developed by Dania Vasiliev. The concept here is, why don't we create a device that would serve as an independent communication machine, meaning that it cannot be identified and demands no permanent internet connectivity. Moreover, this device would be attached to the city traveler in order to automatically pick up and distribute data. So what the participants did with Dania was actually to create such a device and then start drifting through the city to exchange and record messages without a GSM or a subscription to an internet provider. From a developed table-sized model, Netless was attempted as an urban experiment for the first time in the city of Athens. The next workshop, tutored by Gordon Savages, is called City CPU Mapping, a reference to the central processing unit within a computer, and explores how the data byte of the city can be mapped. It tries to utilize online mapping tools like OpenStreetMap or Field Papers in order to create new narrations between the city itself and its data body. As outcome of this workshop, a new map of Athens is attempted, a collaborative archive of urban data and hidden layers found in Psyri, an area in the center of Athens. Urban infrastructure, such as GSM cell towers or waste bins, as well as Wi-Fi networks or graffiti street art, are tracked and recorded. The last workshop, Electromagnetic Cityscape, with Sabrina Basten and Audrey Sampson, explores how electromagnetic fields can be detected. Participants design and build a wearable device from repurposed objects that makes electromagnetic fields audible. Particles of old radios, TVs, VHS players, mobiles, or kitchen appliances become electrosmog detectors attached to the body, which function as antennas. New movements and new interactions become possible through these reincarnated objects, which in a playful and creative way can raise awareness about the network environment. To conclude, Datenspiel is an example showing how to raise awareness and provide citizens with tools of emancipation for the regaining of control, while attempting to game the city as a complex system. Although still a work in progress, it opens the way to experimenting with the idea that the digital network can be used in the creation of new forms of knowledge that transcend the limits of network logic, generating ways in which the resistance of the outside of networks can be intensified into new models of subjectivity that change what participation means. We're just beginning to imagine what thinking of the network might look like. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your excellent presentations and for being so good with time. Indeed, it doesn't happen very often. And now I can open the Q&A session. You can ask anything you want.
The second question was about how far these methods and techniques have progressed since Bill Hillier with Space Syntax Group started experimenting with putting people in virtual worlds and following them around. Well, we are using a combination of different softwares. If I understood your question correctly, the first, the end product is based on Unity for the projection of the virtual environments on the goggles of the Oculus Rift. But before that, we are using some proprietary software that the guys at NCSA have developed. It's called Virtual Director and some other analysis tools they are working on. Now, as for your second question, yes, as I mentioned in my presentation, This incorporation, there are two strands. First is the technical, which relies on the use of Oculus Rift and the treadmill, which obviously is much more direct as an experience than anything else we have had in the past. So obviously, if social scientists, ethnographers, architects, urban planners want to pose some questions that are more qualitatively complex and rich than simple basic stuff, going from point A to point B because I'm interested in window shopping and the stuff that all these methodologies started, when they started, they were using. This hardware provides a better basis for the researchers to understand and follow and study the bodily movement of the user in the virtual space, since he or she is moving also in the physical space, so it's much more direct. This is the first strand of differentiation or development or evolution, call it as you like. The second one is that we hope that all these layers that come from different disciplines and have to do with narratives, with history, with archaeological questions, and with society and cultural issues, if they are incorporated in the virtual environment, give a whole different experience and obviously can engage different users in many more ways than what they used to do or they kind of doing even now at the Space Index.
Any other questions? Someone? Well, there's a sentence that stuck with me throughout the presentations, and it's a sentence from the abstract of James and Emma, and it is, I wrote it down to mention it in the end, phenomenal experiences of virtual spaces in real-world settings. And what strikes me here is that the virtual always comes back to the physical. So in all your presentations, we had the virtual, but it always connected very strongly to something that was like real time or very physically special somehow. So I do remember back in the day when I started reading about virtual environments and new media, because my background is in art and film and curating, so all the dialogue on new media was really things that I could not understand. I really felt stupid. All the theory about it, all the logic of not connecting to the physical, not connecting to the real, made it somehow incomprehensible to me. So now I really like your approach that you all, each one of you all spoke about something very graspable, and then how you created a certain difference to it, or you created a parallel universe, but not too complex, in order to not understand. It was more to play with, more to experience, than to kind of show off. How would you react to this?
What you described is very interesting, and it's I totally agree. Coming from architecture, one could talk about Marcos Novak and all the cyber architects that they were talking about, creating a totally different place than Earth, and how all these questions have progressed now. I think it's totally true, and it has to do with the epistemological progress and evolution of both media and theory. When first you play, first you go to the other side of the spectrum, and then you see how you can combine them, and you can create something that it's a synthesis of everything. And maybe that, obviously, I think for all of us, tries to make a better contribution to the real world and the society.
Yeah, I think, in response to what you're saying, for me, it always seems strange that sort of first wave of virtual reality stuff in the mid-90s, that it was trying to sort of move us away from the, when there's a world out there which is amazing, and we can go and experience that, and it will be sort of infinitely more interesting probably than some of these things that were sort of being proposed. So I think now that the technology's kind of moved on, and it's sort of matured to a point where people can think about different ways of applying it. It's moved away from that just sort of focus on the technology, but more to do with sort of it just being a kind of tool for dealing with other experiences or other ideas, or human experiences, I suppose. And the work that we've been doing, which involves mobile devices, is not an immersive experience entirely. It's very much about sort of being aware of your surroundings, as well as having sort of something else layered over the top of that. And I think that's sort of an interesting development.
It's also kind of immersive, I would argue, because it gives a different reading of the space that your visitor experiences. Because, okay, there's a space and there are many objects, but he needs to find the sword. So automatically I would argue that it kind of becomes a new space, a new platform of thinking and of moving. But for me it was very interesting to see how it operated, and you did that very nicely, because you showed the visitor walking along, you showed the platform, you showed how it operates. It always connected to the physical space.
I think what was really interesting when I was asking people for their responses about their experiences and writing down what they said, and I could have shown lots of different responses, but one thing which really resonated, I think, was the idea that somebody was saying that it wasn't that I forgot the outside world or what was around me, it was just that it didn't seem important whilst I was listening. So whilst I was in that other world, the world didn't disappear, but somehow my attention was focused elsewhere. And so there was this kind of dual experience.
Yeah, first of all, I wanna say that I agree totally with the whole thing around hybrid space, which means the convergence of physical and virtual space. And I want to add regarding your projects that this immersion becomes more intense, in my opinion, because the medium becomes more transparent. For example, we saw that the medium was the phone. It's not, for example, computers were in the first period like one room, and now that's the phone. This immersion, the medium becomes transparent, and I totally agree with the immersion thing regarding this.
I was just wondering if any of the panel had any thoughts about potential dangers or like negative side effects as these sort of virtual technologies and experiences develop. Because I think very exciting, and I feel very sort of positive about sort of how they're developing. I think there's many applications for improving society, but I'm wondering, are there any potential sort of negative side effects that we should sort of think about as we're developing these technologies?
One needs to reply and repeat the question for the microphone. Go on.
I think Darwinian selection will erase all the potential problematic uses of these technologies. Those that are, I can't imagine any kind of not useful application of these technologies, but the individuality and the enhancements of the individuality. But then again, we see so many examples of how internet's use that enhances this connection and social interaction, even not physical, but being able to interact with multiples of tens of people than you used to. Obviously, this technology can help engaging more people and allows you to interact with and be more sociable than not having it, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've seen a previous presentation, I'm not humanities, I'm engineering. Saw a previous presentation at another conference where they said that the goggles for the 3D virtual reality, they're after about 10 hours of use, not continuous use, but cumulative, you tended to display seasickness, motion sickness.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are seeing things move, but your body says you're not moving, which is effectively the same as motion sickness. And that it became so pronounced that after about 8 to 10 hours use, you can't even put the goggles on, because as soon as you put them on, the body starts to
React.
Yeah. And that a lot of the virtual systems now don't actually use goggles, they have a screen so that your peripheral vision can still see the real world, which does away with all that motion sickness type of thing.
Well, that's why they have this treadmill, and now they are also experimenting with developing applications that can be screened in Oculus Rift goggles, but are connected to the structure and the organization of the physical space. So you move simultaneously, both in the virtual, you move your body both in the virtual and in the physical space, because obviously this sickness, motion sickness problem is serious. It has to do also with some technical issues. It depends on the person, his or his eyesight, and the way the heads and the calibration of the two screens in the goggles are set up.
Yeah, I don't know about the negativity of technology and negative direction that it could take. Not just talking about virtual reality, but if you've seen the Black Mirror, of course, the pervasiveness of technology can take negative directions. But sometimes I think that the issue is that we are at the beginning of the experimentation. So it's like when they were starting like 200 and more years ago, starting to do experiment with blood transfusion, they didn't know that we had different blood type. And they made a lot of mess, and that was a mess with life risk of people who were under experiment. And in a way, we are at the beginning. So there are a lot of experiments which are done for experiment's sake. Like I agree about the use of virtual reality to create all these fantastic worlds, which in a way from the game side are really interesting. But I think that, now we are in a kind of advanced step. We are evolving in the use of technology in our life, and we are kind of starting. We have been doing that for a few years now, to use technology to provide additional experience, something which gives something more to our life rather than something different. Not considering it a different world, but a new part of our life, physical life.
I've got one tiny little thought.
Of course, please.
Yeah.
Which isn't really a comment as such. Probably amazed to find that I may be one of the few people in the world who actually comes from Casablanca.
Okay, you know where it is.
I know where it is, yeah, we're all there. I wouldn't say it's in the middle of nowhere.
Sorry.
Actually, if you're interested in these little facts, it's in the middle of everywhere, because it's the furthest you can get from the sea in this country.
Is the farther.
Miles, yeah. You're never more than 80 miles from the coast in the UK, and it occurs at Casablanca.
Okay.
Well done.
Yeah. Actually, no, I'm based in Nottingham, and I come from Ancona in Italy, which is by the sea, and I miss the sea in England, and I managed to be in the place which is farther from the sea, in an island. I live on an island, and I'm farther from the sea as I can be. So I knew that more or less is there. Okay.
Castle, from Castle Donington, is actually from Norman the Conquest, so 1066.
Okay.
It's not there now, it's gone. But it was there.
And with this happy note, I'm inviting you all for refreshments next to the registration.